twilight's fast gleaming, whose no stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight. O'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets' red glare, the bombs were singing air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave.
Thank you, Robert. Thank you, Rusty. Please remain standing, and town persons will deliver the invocation.
Thank you, President. I got a call this morning and asked if I would do the blessing today, and I sat at my desk and I thought, and I wrote down some notes, and got to thinking about the events of the last week or two. And my grandson was home with me this weekend, and I guess it was on Thursday afternoon late after they captured that young man. My grandson came running out of the garage and he says, "Papa, I know what we need to do with him. I know what we need to do with him." And I said, "Wait, before you do that, let's talk a few minutes." So we kind of talked through the whole process. It was an incredible learning experience, talking about our government, how we deal with things. And then a little later on that night, these beautiful people from Charleston stood and out of their heart said, "I forgive you, I forgive you." And my grandson came back a little later on and he said, "Papa," he said, "he really is a sick person, isn't he?" I said, "Yes, son. What bothers me is how this hate got manifested in such a young man." And we all think that we're going to get, each generation thinks it's going to get better and get better and get better. But this one was the one that I think stunned us all. Let us pray, please, if you'll bow your head. Our most wonderful and gracious Heavenly Father, we thank you for this day. We thank you for you. We thank you for the blessings you send our way. And we pray, Father, that you'll be with the people of South Carolina and the people in the United States and around the world as they deal with this despicable act. And we pray, Father, that somehow we too can forgive and try and move to the next step. Those beautiful people at the church, the senator who was a friend, and others who are with you now, sleeping, Lord, resting and forgiving. We ask it, Father, in your name and for your sake. Amen. And I hope that sometime today, if you'll just kind of, as you're driving, as you're at your desk, let's just kind of stop and maybe say 9 quick little blessings for these people, because it really is the most unbelievable thing that's happened in our state. And it just saddened me that it happened in South Carolina. We think these things don't happen here, but they do. So thank you very much, and God bless you.
Thank you, Tom. You may be seated. Ed Greenleaf is going to be coming up to welcome our visiting Rotarians and guests. If you would take a moment to lift up the cart bucket on each table. Those funds are going to raise Alzheimer's research. Bob Borum did make us aware when he came this morning that June is Alzheimer's and Brain Awareness Month. So just keep that in mind as you're contributing to the cart bucket this month.
Good afternoon, everyone. Wow, that's loud. What a beautiful prayer. Joining me in this exercise is Beth Irick. I'm Ed Greenleaf, and we'd like to welcome today Tony Thompson from the Capitol Club. Would you please stand so we can greet you? There's Tony over there, the glasses on top of his head. Beaver Hardy from Columbia East. Beaver, there you are, bow tie. Welcome aboard. Glad to have you here. And if you have a guest today, if you would please stand so Beth can come bring the microphone to you. Here we go.
Yes, I'm. Okay.
Hello.
I have 2 guests with me today. They're actually Keith Woods, our speaker from AECOM. We have Leslie Price, who works at AECOM, and also John Peak. Sorry.
I'm John Denise, and I'm proud to have as my guests. Did we turn it off? My guests, Chip Prezioso and Kim Hoffler from Palmetto Promotions.
I'm Rusty DeFast, and I have as my guest today my former bodyguard, Principal Air, and the Director of Business Development for Physicians Wear, which is a division of Ed Robinson Cleaning. So be nice to my son, Rusty DeFast.
That's it, President John.
It's not a good combination.
I've got an announcement for the Wofford Mafia here today. I'll get back here, so. You got Mike's not really getting here, and I want to make sure I got this in. You turn it on? Hello? Yeah, okay. This weekend, our club hosted the Carolina Match Play Championship in golf. And there was some awfully good golfers there. I mean, the winners ended up, or the finalists all ended up being college players who were outstanding. And a young man from Wofford beat a young man from Alabama, beat him handily, I want you to know, in the finals. So Wofford came out on top, and I congratulate all of you Wofford guys.
Thanks, Doug.
Thank you. We now like to turn it over to Bob Moore for health and happiness.
Thank you. On your tables, I believe you have this announcement, little card from Salvation Army about the summer camp. We want to help send poor kids to camp, and theirs is your opportunity right before you. Let's see what else. Aubrey Brown, where are you? There you are. She sings with the Sandlapper Singers, and they have just completed a tour to D.C. where they sang at, let's see, Arlington. They sang at the National Cathedral, and where else did you sing there? And Lincoln Memorial. Yeah, it was a great tour, and we're proud to have you representing South Carolina and us there. Wayne Cannon handed me something as it came in, an announcement in the paper today about the death of Sam McGregor, who's the Rotary president of his club, another club, but he was a frequent visitor here, and many of you knew him, and we send our sympathy, yes, to the family of Sam McGregor. Invocations, if you would like to be a part of the invocation rotation, get in touch with Regina Brown, and she would love to have volunteers. Well, it's hot. And it's dry. But interestingly enough, even though it's hot and dry here, it's been raining in Texas. You read about the floods in Texas? Yeah, interesting. There was a little town in Texas that was out in the boonies, out in nowhere really, and so they went to bed in that town on a Saturday night, and late Saturday night it started raining, and it rained and it rained and it rained all day Sunday, more rain than they had ever seen before, just tons of rain, and the water started rising, and the floods came, and by Sunday night the town was flooded and people started leaving their houses. And on Monday morning, people were sitting on the rooftops. And one lady was sitting on her roof, and another lady was sitting on her roof. And they looked out at the floodwaters, which was so high, and they saw this 10-gallon hat coming across, floating across. And it got to the edge there of the property, and it stopped. And it then floated back in the other direction, and it stopped. And then it floated back in the other direction, and it stopped. It kept doing that, back and forth, back and forth. And the lady next door called over and said, "Ma," said, "you see that? Strangest thing I've ever seen. 10-gallon hat just going back and forth in this flood. Did you see that?" She said, "Yeah, what is it?" She said, "Well, it's my husband, Henry. said, he's the stubbornest man I ever seen in my life. When we went to bed Saturday night, he said he was going to mow the lawn Monday, come hell or high water. I want you to know that that yesterday I retired for the third time. Maybe this time it'll stick. That was my last Sunday at the little church I've been serving for 3 years, and my third retirement. There were a lot of older people in that congregation. Sometimes in that small congregation, it looked like I was speaking to a whole bunch of Q-tips and hard-boiled eggs. You know what I mean? But there's a story about this young guy who was going to his first church, and he was going to preach what would be his first sermon, and he was nervous, and he didn't know what to do. He called his older minister, and he said to him, I need some advice. I'm new at this church. I'm going to preach my first sermon at this church. You know, what do I do? He said, how can I get these people's attention? And the older minister, who was very wise and experienced, said, what you need to do is you need to say something at the very beginning that will grab their attention. He says like this: some of the best years of my life were spent in the arms of a woman who was not my wife. And the young minister said, see, that ought to get their attention pretty well. And so he took that advice, and next Sunday was the first Sunday there, and he stood up before the congregation, and he said, cleared his throat, gathered his nervousness, his knees were shaking, and he said, the guy had told him, said, the punchline on that is, when you say that, to say, it was my mother. So he stood and he said, some of the best years of my life were spent in the arms of a woman who was not my wife. And he paused, and he couldn't remember the punchline. And he said it again, said, some of the best years of my life were spent in the arms of a woman who was not my wife. And after a long pause, he said, and for the life of me, I can't remember who it was. I said there were some older people in my congregation. It reminds me of a story about this class reunion. It was June this time for class reunions. And this widow and this widower were at a class reunion. It was their 65th class reunion, 65 years. They had known each other going up through grade school. They had known each other for a long time. And one was a widow, one was a widower. And they sat at a table with two other people, and they looked across the table at one another and began smiling and making eyes at each other. And the widower kind of winked at the widow, and she returned his advances with a smile. And finally, at the end of the evening, he slipped over to the chair right beside her, and he said to her, will you marry me? And she said, yes, yes, I will, with all my heart, yes, I will. And they were both so happy, and he went back to his hotel room that night, and he got to thinking, did she say yes, or did she say no? I can recall the events of the time. I can recall asking, did she say yes, or did she say no? So he called her up on the phone, and he said, we had a great evening last night. I'll say yes with you really did. And he said, gathering up his courage, I asked you last night if you would marry me, and did you say yes or no? And she said, I said yes. I said yes. I meant it with all my heart. I said yes. And he was so excited. And then she added this, and I'm so glad you called, although I had forgotten who it was that asked me. Well, I guess that's it. Time's out. We've all been sad by the tragic events in Charleston, and a lot of folks have said, what can we do about that? And aside from the obvious expressions of sympathy and of love for these people, what can we do? I think that in our own lives and in our own communities, we can stop thinking about people in terms of us and them, and finding ways to demonize the them. We can stop doing that across racial and gender lines, political lines, and realize that in this world we're all one, and it's not us and them. And when we hear things that are degrading to other people, we cannot listen and not pass it on and express our disapproval. Well, it's not of us and them. We're all in it together. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bob. That was a very appropriate way to close it. When Alan Wilson was here a couple weeks ago, that was the theme, how he opened his program. He said, talking about focusing on what unites us, not what divides us. And that's what brings us together. Before we go into our program, I would like to give everyone a quick recap of the LeaderCast event we had on Thursday. We had a very successful event. We appreciate everyone who came and supported the club that day. I would like to thank our committee. The committee worked hard on this, and some of the emails went back over 15 months into December of 2013. But Jack Sloan, Dot Ryle, Doug Cochran, Jim Morris, and Ellen Weaver, if everyone would give them a big round of applause. But all of them really grabbed the bull by the horn, took a step of faith into something and made a vision a reality. I'm very appreciative of all the hard work you did for the club. On Thursday, we had 434 tickets that were committed for use. 399 of those were bought. The additional tickets were used for sponsors or as outreach. Of the 434 tickets, we had 304 Rotarians and guests show up for the event on Thursday. And unofficially, the club has raised a net amount of $29,800 to go towards our scholarship efforts. So I want to thank everybody for supporting the event and our sponsors again. We've been highlighting our sponsors since December, but the board made the decision last spring that if we could have the sponsors commit to support the event and cover the initial costs, that we would move forward as a club. So each of our sponsors who from the get-go bought into the idea and bought into the vision and made a financial contribution to make this work, we'd like to give a round of applause to all of our sponsors. That being said, we'd like to turn it over to Jeff Griffin to introduce our program.
Thank you, President John. Good afternoon. I'm Jeff Griffin. I have the honor of serving as president of W.O. Blackstone Mechanical Contractors. It's my privilege today to introduce Keith Wood, our speaker. He's from AECOM, and some of the best days of his life were spent in the arm. But no. I enjoyed that joke, Robert. Keith is the Vice President of Marketing and Communications for AECOM Management Services Group. Keith's primary function is to represent AECOM's management services as its chief spokesperson. He made it very clear that he works for an engineering firm, but he's not an engineer. He's a marketing and business development professional. AECOM is ranked number one for revenues on the E&R record, which is a trade publication that we follow in the construction industry, and that's a pretty big deal. The revenues start with a B. Mr. Wood joined the company in 1989 and held numerous positions. Most importantly, he's a graduate of USC here in Columbia. He's from Aiken, went to Midland Valley High School in Aiken County. He lives in Aiken now with his wife, Angela. They have two boys, both of them graduates of South Carolina. One is an accountant with Blue Cross Blue Shield here in town, and one is in banking in Augusta, Georgia. He's very proud of his family, and we wanted to give him a good, warm Rotary welcome today. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff. Let me finish his line. One woman, Angela. Let's make sure that gets reported back to her. Okay? before I start with the presentation, I do want to acknowledge my two colleagues in front of me. The gentleman in the red shirt is John Peak, and John actually does a lot of the work, the real work that I'm going to talk about here in a few minutes. And then Leslie Price, who's my colleague, she's also in government affairs with AECOM, and she's an elected official in Aiken with Aiken City Council. And then one more person, or persons I'd like to mention, are the two down here in the front, Chip Prezioso and Kim Hoffler. They work for Palmetto Promotions, and obviously a good marketer needs staff and support and vendors to help us, and they do that. And I couldn't help but think about Chip last night. I was up late watching the golf tournament, and of course it reminded me of a story that Chip told me. He's pretty close with Coach Spurrier, and he went to one of the radio call-in shows one evening. And Coach Spurrier gets to talking, and he highlights Chip during part of the segment where he's talking about friends and family. And he says, I'd like for everyone to acknowledge and recognize my good friend Chippy Prezioso, former All-American golfer at the University of South Carolina. Well, Chip, being the honest person that he is, he runs up during the break and says, Coach Spurrier, you got that wrong. I was not All-American. And Coach Spurrier didn't skip a beat. His reaction was, well, you are now. Now, why I'm here. I'm here to talk about AECOM. And I was impressed Jeff got the name right, because a lot of people mispronounce that. And a lot of people think that we're in the .com industry. We are not. We're a large engineering, construction, technical services firm. Very, very large, primarily through acquisitions. I'm going to do three things. I'd like to, hopefully everyone will leave here today understanding who we are, understanding the presence we have here in South Carolina, and also the presence we have at the Savannah Riverside. So those are my three goals. This map on this slide represents the totality of the company, our locations. We're an international firm. We've got 100,000 employees. You mentioned revenue, $19.5 billion. That's pretty large. That means we've got a lot of work around the world, a lot of work here in the U.S., but also South Carolina. I've got two videos in this presentation. The first one's about 2 minutes long. We give you a feel of the company. And towards the end of the presentation, about a 30-second video to talk about some of the work we're doing in Savannah River. We turn the audio. Can you go?
Are creating a better tomorrow.
For me, AECOM is all about people who passionately and enthusiastically work together, taking dreams and turning them into reality.
How? By sharing your expertise and knowledge and uniting together for a common purpose.
Good urban design provides the city with an opportunity to create something that its inhabitants can feel proud of.
We call it Mindshare. And this is how you transform a single life, a community, a city, a nation.
It's exciting to see how some of our new understanding, as well as our new approaches, are shaping a drastically different world.
This is a By rising to the challenge together, we soar higher. Will that make the world a better place? We think so. In countless ways. Nearly 100,000 strong.
What the project shows is the strength of the community and New York City as a whole, what we are as a people. You know, the workforce down here takes a lot of pride in what's going on, especially with what happened at Ground Zero.
feel the magnitude of the projects that we work on, and obviously we're quite proud of the work we've done at the World Trade Center. I was there in April and have seen the finished product, and it's very, very impressive. The next slide was mentioned earlier. The engineering news and record somewhat ranks companies like AECOM and our competitors. And this slide represents our ranking, and you can see that we do very, very well in the industry. If it's something to be built, we do it, ranging from water, construction projects, dams, bridges, to skyscrapers, sports arenas, stadiums, things like that. So pretty good sized company. But we also do things that probably don't have as much sex appeal, and that'll come towards the end of my presentation when I talk about our nuclear work. But a very, very large and productive engineering. This slide gives you a representation of how big we have become and what the timeline is. The company started in 1990. It was an employee-based company, a little over 4,000 employees, and now it's grown to 100,000. A couple of dates on that timeline I'd like to highlight. 2007 is when it became a publicly traded company. And then this past year, when they acquired the company that I was formerly employed by, URS, which doubled the size of the company. AECOM, which is based in Los Angeles, that's where our corporate headquarters is located, acquired URS in October. Through our transition, we began operating as one company in January of this year. It's been a huge transition, and we're still somewhat going through that. But the companies there at the bottom right are the old engineering construction companies that you've probably heard of. The EG&G name, Westinghouse name, BP Barber, which has had a strong presence here in Columbia, South Carolina, and throughout this region. So all those engineering names that you remember, they're part of the AECOM family these days. Of course, I couldn't talk about our work if I didn't mention safety. We deal with a lot of dangerous materials. These projects are very, very complex and dangerous to construct. So safety has to be at the forefront. And the two projects I want to mention here locally, and then South Carolina have done very well from a safety standpoint, is the Savannah River site, our limited liability company called Savannah River Remediation, 27.2 million man-hours in construction. That's unheard of in the Department of Energy business. And then also our consulting services out of Aiken called Professional Solutions has been acknowledged by the South Carolina Chamber for their safety efforts. The next several slides are just really some photos of the projects that we're involved in. And it's to give you a magnitude, the scale of what we're doing around the world. The one in the top left, I don't know if you've paid attention to the news media, but there's a spaceport that's being constructed in New Mexico. Actually, the grand opening, I think, is this week. We're involved in the design and the architectural work for that project. The one over to the right is the redesign and revampment of the Dubai airport. We're the architecture record there. And of course, the building to the right, just to give you a feel, we're also involved in construction in the healthcare industry. I could not create a slide if I didn't let everyone know here in South Carolina that we have a track record in designing, engineering, and construction management with respect to automobile plants. And the picture in the bottom left is the Hyundai site in Russia that we teamed with to build there. And we're also doing some work for BMW down in Mexico, so we have a strong track record with the automotive industry. The photo to the bottom right is a 55-story apartment complex that's being constructed in New York, going on right now. And the one in the top left is for the Department of Homeland Security. That's the largest building construction project that agency has, and we're designing for them as we speak. I mentioned sports arenas, complexes. I know that the University of South Carolina, Clemson, and others are always looking to revamp, modernize their facilities. Well, we're pretty much involved in that through our company called Hunt Construction. Master planning, engineering, architecture, design, construction management, operations management. We're involved in all of those facilities. About half of the major league ballparks in this country, in some fashion, we've been involved in building those. The latest one that's getting some interest is the Atlanta Falcons Stadium. We're involved in the design, specifically the new video board that's going to be placed in there. And then we've been involved in construction of Olympic complexes, facilities since 1992. So a very, very strong track record there, very profitable business for us. We have a strong portfolio with the Department of Defense, a lot of which I can't talk about. It's based obviously in the Germantown, Washington, D.C. area. I will tell you that we pretty much train all of the Army and Air Force aircraft helicopter pilots. We do a lot of base management here within the country, but also in foreign lands. And then we are also involved in some of the classified work for foreign intelligence. So strong portfolio there, and that's more in line in the area that I'm involved with the U.S. government. Now, second portion of the presentation is to give you a feel for our presence here in South Carolina. Those little circles are the location of our offices. We have some smaller offices I have not identified, but we've had a strong track record here through Aiken, South Carolina, Columbia, Charleston, as well as Fort Mill. Most of the employees here are broken down through Savannah River, the Savannah River Project. We manage the liquid waste work there. That's about 1,500 employees in Aiken. We have a corporate headquarters, which I'll touch on in just a moment, which is about 25 corporate employees and about 400 that do consultancy work. And then John and his team, through our design consulting services, have another 250 across the state with about 90 here in Columbia. Is that right, John? Yeah. I couldn't fill up this slide with all of the services that we provide through our design consulting services group. Obviously, if you're interested, John can give you a lot more after this presentation. But just about any municipality that's constructing a wastewater facility, or if there's work that's being done with DHAG through the Superfund and cleanup, we've been there and done that and have a strong track record in helping the state. Fort Mill, South Carolina, we have a power division that's located there, about 150 nuclear engineers that are based in Fort Mill, primarily to support the nuclear, or what we thought was going to be the nuclear renaissance. It is somewhat slowed down, of course, but nonetheless, those folks are all over the country providing support for the commercial nuclear industry. The government nuclear work is based in Aiken. We're very proud of what they're doing. A lot of that has moved away from nuclear more into the natural gas support, but nonetheless, we feel good about that for the future. I mentioned we've got a corporate location in Aiken, South Carolina. It's called Nuclear Environment Business Unit. It manages all of our DOE, Department of Energy business, and also manages the international equivalent to that. 25 corporate employees, managing about 20,000 employees worldwide. We have about a $4.5 billion revenue running through that little office there. The photo at the bottom left, it has URS. We haven't changed the name, but that's actually the town theater that we're adjacent to. So we're trying to give back to Aiken. The photo to the bottom right, that kind of give you the feel of the nature, the complexity of the work that we do. Our engineers in Aiken were involved in creating the power supply and the quality assurance work for the Mars rover. So we're quite proud of that. And of course, I'm going to touch on the DOE in just a moment. When I mentioned corporate headquarters and the types of projects we manage, these are the projects within the Department of Energy. The photo at the top left is the bottom of the salt mine called the Waste Isolation Pilot Plant. That's where the nation's transuranic waste is buried. We've been the managing and operating contractor there for 35 years. It's going through its hiccups right now. The mine has been shut down for a little over a year as a result of some issues from some waste that was moved from Los Alamos National Lab. But just imagine a salt mine near the Carlsbad Tavern is about a mile deep where this waste is stored. The photo to the top right is the Sellafield Nuclear Energy Complex. That's in the northwest of England. That's the Savannah River site, as well as commercial activities, all combined in about a 2 square mile area. Very, very challenging project. We've been on that job since 2007. The photo to the bottom left is a photo that you wouldn't have seen years ago. That's actually the Oak Ridge, Tennessee complex. That's where the K-25 facilities were located. The photo at the bottom, we've torn all that down, demolished it, very radioactive facilities. The photo in the caption of the top right is what those facilities look like. That's where all the uranium work is done for the Manhattan Project. You had three locations: the Hanford site up in the state of Washington, which produced plutonium, Oak Ridge, Tennessee, uranium, and of course, Los Alamos is where all the material was assembled. And we're about to take down the last facility on Friday there at K25 in Oak Ridge. And then the photo to the right is the Hanford site. That's in the southeast portion of the state of Washington. As I mentioned earlier, that's part of the Manhattan Project. That's where the original reactors were constructed to produce plutonium for our nuclear weapons complex. Savannah River. We've been at Savannah River, the Savannah River site, for 26 years. This is a satellite photo of the site. I don't know if you can see the center portion of that where it's totally green. You're looking at a site that's 310 square miles. It was carved out from 3 different counties, Aiken, Barlow, and Allendale. It was the home of 5 reactors, 2 large chemical separation facilities, and a number of other support facilities, primarily to produce plutonium and tritium for our nuclear weapons complex. You don't produce plutonium any longer. Tritium is still produced. Plutonium pretty much lasts forever, so you don't need to do that. But now the major effort is to clean up that site. After 40 years of production, you've got a large byproduct, waste byproduct that has to be cleaned up, and that's the role of our company moving forward. Here's some photos of the facilities we manage at the Savannah River site. They're all the liquid waste facilities. You've got 37 million gallons of high-level waste. Some of you may say, well, wait a minute, that's the number it was a couple years ago. Well, that's true because you have to add water and other materials to these large tanks that we are cleaning out, so it adds a waste component to it. But we're making significant progress in emptying those tanks, and believe me, you want us to do that because this is the state's highest environmental risk, without a doubt. So I'll get into that in just a moment. The video I'm going to show you is very brief. It's going to show some robots in the bottom of a high-level waste tank. I want to give you a feel for the scale, the magnitude, the complexity of this work, so it won't take long. And here's the original construction of those tanks. 51 tanks. They were built in the 40s and 50s. They're carbon steel tanks, and the goal of our company, the goal of our government, is to empty those tanks, to get out of those tanks. You want to make sure that you stabilize that waste for our state and for our country. The photos to the right kind of gives you a feel for the inside of the tanks. You have a mixture of water, sludge, and what we call salt cake that we have to get out the inside of the tank. Obviously, with being very radioactive, everything is done remotely. No human has gone inside those tanks since they were constructed in the 50s. Very small space that we have to deal with, so somewhat complex, and we utilize the Savannah River National Lab to support us in doing that, so thanks to them. This last slide, or next to last slide, gives you a feel for what happens next. So you had the 5 reactors and the 2 chemical separation facilities that operated for almost 40 years. You had the production of the waste that came with the production of the materials, the nuclear materials. So for the longest period of time, that waste was just stored in Savannah River. So today, what are we doing? The idea is to empty those large tanks that I just showed you. Secondly, you want to turn that waste into a form where it's not mobile. So we vitrify the waste, glassify the waste in these large stainless steel canisters. We've produced about 3,300 to date. Ultimately, those canisters are going to be shipped out of the state to the federal repository. And there's a huge political debate as to where that may be. Yucca Mountain is the site on record today, but it's all kind of hung up in some politics with respect to the administration and the Congress. So those canisters are stored in the building up in the far right corner, and they're down below grade in those plugs. And again, we want to ship that. The photo to the top left is actually the transporter that moves the high-level waste, that glass canister, from one building to another. And the two photos at the bottom are two large vaults that we're currently constructing. I think the photo to the right gives you a better picture. That's probably one of the largest storage vaults in the U.S. And what's taking place there is we're mixing the lower level material with grout, with cement, and that will remain here in the state of South Carolina. Of course, the South Carolina Department of DHEC is our regulator of record, and they watch very closely what we do, and they have to buy into all of these processes and the timelines to do it. This current schedule to close our tanks, to finish the last tank is around 2032, 2033. We can maintain that, but I always like to put in some caveats, and the caveat is it's all based on federal funding, FAT funding. All right, so hopefully I've at least expressed who AECOM is, the role we have here in the state of South Carolina and the Savannah Riverside. I've kind of glazed over some of this. It's somewhat complex, but I'd be more than happy to take any questions in relation to anything I've covered. Yes, sir.
I believe you said you were founded around 1991, 92, and also did your first Olympics job about that same time. How did a brand new company land an Olympics job?
Actually, it was the first Olympics job was prior to that. I think it was with a previous company we had acquired. So when I mentioned we've been involved since '92, that basically stems from us becoming a company. But a lot of the work that we've done is through acquisition, it's through companies that had relationships, and you can see the growth of our company has been through acquisition. So that's where it stems from. Yes, sir.
This may be a little more trivial than some of the other weighty things you could talk about, but my ears perked up when you talked about the World Trade Center. And I just got back from New York, and a week ago yesterday, I was at the top of the World Trade Center, one World Observation Day. And it's ironic that I would meet you today, but when I was there, all I could think about was the design firms and the team of people that must have gone into this, because every one of us just thinks about a building, and you got offices, and maybe there's parking or whatever. But this is a building that is really built, this part of it, with tourists in mind. It's a tourist site. And I was struck, the elevators, for those of you who may not visit, 3 sides of the elevators are video displays, so that as you ride up and come down, you're looking out at New York. You come up from under the ground, and as you come down, you spiral down, and so it's a virtual ride. And it's an incredibly large area up top. Could you say anything about the design and your work on that?
Well, Tishman Construction, who's a company we acquired, by the way, has a strong track record in New York City building skyscrapers. I would be remiss if I didn't mention some of the other projects that we're currently building, but we're very proud of the Trade Center. I cannot comment on the specific design. I was not involved in that. My guess is, though, that our designers had a lot of help from the regulators and those from New York City that were involved in putting that together. I will tell you, we made it look a little simple in how we sped up the video. It takes years to build a facility like that. And then when I was there, I was somewhat impressed by the security. And it's the security that you don't see. You can walk up to that building, but there's no vehicle that's going to come close to those buildings the way they have redesigned these today. But I can't comment specifically on the design. Yes, sir.
Can you tell us more about the waste depository in Nevada versus wherever else you said, Yucca Mountain? And what's the likelihood we'll be able to use that facility that cost us so much to build?
Well, you have the Waste Isolation Pilot Plant, which is an operational repository for the lower level waste, the transuranic waste. The high level waste and the commercial radioactive waste, which is now located basically at every reactor site, is destined for repository. For 20 years or more, there's been work that has been ongoing to look at the Yucca Mountain site, which is about 90 miles from Las Vegas, everyone. And it's close to Las Vegas, but at the end of the day, it's also in the middle of nowhere. Having said that, with this Congress and with this President, I don't think they had much energy in moving forward the Yucca Mountain project. I think with the change in the Congress, both the House and the Senate, you're going to see that being revisited. But the administration is currently looking at other sites to locate the high-level waste material, and they're going to actually go out and seek states and communities that are willing to raise their hand and look at that. And believe it or not, there are some other communities that are interested in that. What's going to happen with Yucca Mountain, I think time will tell. A lot of it's intertwined with politics.
Keith, is the plan to move the majority of what you have there to a repository, or you said some of this is to be permanently there? Is the majority to move out?
If you go back to this slide here, the waste that's destined for a federal repository is the waste that's down below grade in that building up in the far right. Again, these are stainless steel canisters, 10 foot by 2. Glass is inside the stainless steel canister. So the idea is to send the waste that's the most highly radioactive waste out of the state of South Carolina. The lower level waste would be buried in those large vaults. So the bulk of the waste in volume stays at the Savannah River site. The bulk of the waste and radioactivity leaves the Savannah River site. To where? It's not determined yet. That goes back to the discussion we just mentioned with respect to Yucca Mountain. Yes, sir.
How long has Yucca Mountain been under construction, and what's been spent to date on Yucca Mountain that they're now talking about just mothballing?
Well, when you say construction, you've had engineering studies that date back for decades, and there's billions of dollars that have been spent on Yucca Mountain to this point.
How deep is it?
How big is it?
How deep is Yucca Mountain?
I'm not sure. I can get back to you. I can pull that up and let you know. I'm not exactly sure. The whip side is roughly a mile deep.
These 10 by 2 glass containers, how much do they weigh a piece? Do you have any?
Thousands of pounds. I mean, we basically pour one a day. It's a very, very slow process, very costly process. I don't have a picture of the facility that does that. It's called the Defense Waste Processing Facility. But you can see from the mobile unit there that they're fairly heavy. And the government hasn't really designed what they're going to do with respect to moving the waste, but all indications are they'll have to use rail.
Have they ever considered jettisoning it into space? Is that even something that considered?
I don't think you want to do that, but I don't think that's under consideration.
Okay.
Yes.
You touched on it on the thinking the nuclear energy would be a renaissance. What's AECOM's take on natural gas and energy in general?
Well, it's a great future for the energy market. The nuclear renaissance has slowed down significantly than what we thought years ago, primarily because of the price of natural gas. So we acquired a company called Flint Energy, which is based in Canada, with the idea that it was coming. And the cost of gasoline and the cost of natural gas has somewhat slowed that down. There is a future, there's no doubt. Nuclear has slowed down significantly. And I don't know if there's anyone from SCG Scana that's in the room. They probably would agree with that.
How many employees do y'all have in South Carolina total across all your companies and divisions?
Roughly 2,500. 1,500 of those are at Savannah River, and we have a limited liability company called Savannah River Remediation, and then the balance are spread throughout the state. With most of those being Aiken, and then Fort Mill, and then Columbia. Other questions? I see that my time's run out. Any other questions? One in the back.
Keith, I don't have a question. I was struck by your presentation earlier about your company seeking the well-being of the communities. And, you know, the Rotary Club is an international organization as well that has the purpose to do the same thing. So I hope you're speaking to a lot of Rotary clubs, maybe get your 100,000 employees in the Rotary clubs around the world and work with Rotary to do some of the things you're doing.
We are. And I kind of glossed over that theme. We're going to be putting a tagline out, I hope I'm not spelling it wrong, that will flow with the AECOM logo that is basically that we're built to deliver a better world. Because if you look at all the different work that we do from construction to water, environment, cleanup, we basically can do anything and everything. And it's not just in our country, it's all around the world. So we will be pushing that. Thank you very much.
Keith, thank you for being here today. Please accept this small token of appreciation from the club for your time today. Thank you. All right, next week, we will be having a leadership transition, which will be our meeting next week. Please join us. We'll be thanking the current board as some of them transition out of their current positions and thanking them for the leadership they provided this Rotary year. And we'll be welcoming in President-elect Mark, who will be moving into the hot seat to lead us in moving forward, serving our community for the next 12 months and his team. And he'll be laying out his vision and some goals he has for us over the upcoming Rotary year. So please join us next week for that important program for our club. Robert Goings will close us out.
America the Beautiful, let's stand.